At 5:31 a.m., the kind of quiet that keeps a farm alive, shattered like glass. My herd bellowed from behind a door that wouldn't budge, and when I rounded the corner with a feed bucket there, it was a blinding white luxury sedan parked crosswise across my barn like a chrome padlock. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming until the animals hit the boards again and the wood trembled under my boots. Then I saw her the neighborhood aesthetics, chair, lipstick, perfect arranging props, as if my workyard were a magazine set. She smiled at her reflection in the car window, while my cattle steamed the air with panic. Something inside me clicked from confusion to calculation. This wasn't a mistake, it was a message. And if she thought a shiny badge from a homeowners committee trumped the law, or my land, she was about to learn the difference the hard way. Before we start, drop your location and local time in the comments. The thing about farming is that it never waits for your convenience. Animals don't understand property disputes, neighborhood politics, or who drives what car. They know hunger routine and the smell of fresh pasture at dawn. That morning, with the sun climbing faster than I could think, my herd knew something was wrong. Their calls hit me like a hammer to the chest, desperate, rhythmic, shaking the boards of the barn as if they could claw their way through. And there, parked with surgical precision, was that Bentley, gleaming white, polished so hard, the sunrise bounced off it like a spotlight. At first I thought maybe it was some lost visitor, maybe even a prank gone too far. But the placement was too deliberate. Nose of the car squared against the barn door bumper, pressed so close I could barely slip my fingers between wood and chrome. No way that happened by accident. And then I spotted her as calm as if she were sipping coffee on a Sunday patio. Melissa Carter. She wasn't technically my neighbor. Our farm lay well outside the manicured lawns and identical driveways of their subdivision, but she was the queen bee of the HOA, and she carried herself like the sheriff of the whole county. Melissa had a clipboard tucked under her arm, though she wasn't writing anything. She was scrolling her phone every now and then, glancing into the polished fender of that Bentley like it was her personal mirror. Her assistant, a girl barely out of college by the looks of it, darted around arranging ridiculous props, a pot of white lilies, a draped length of gauze fluttering on my fence post, even a gilded mirror leaning against the barn wall. My barn. The one built by my father's calloused hands 30 years ago, the one that smelled of hay, sweat, and honest labor. Now it looked like the set for a perfume ad. "Excuse me," I called out, forcing calm into my voice even though my stomach was turning knots. "That car's blocking the only exit for my cattle." Melissa finally looked at me, her face painted with polite annoyance like a teacher interrupted mid-sentence. "This is for the good of the community, Daniel," she said, pronouncing my name with a sharpness that made it sound like an insult. "Your barn is unsightly. We're documenting its impact for our neighborhood improvement report." Unsightly. The word clung to me like a burr. Behind her, the cattle let out another unified bellow, the boards rattling so hard my boots vibrated on the dirt. I felt the feed bucket's handle dig into my palm as my knuckles went white. I tried to reason. Those are living creatures in there. They need out. They need food, air. You can't just. She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. Visual consistency is more important than one man's animals. We're showing what needs to be corrected. You wouldn't understand. My jaw clenched so tight I tasted copper. She wasn't just trespassing. She was declaring dominion, staking her HOA authority over land that didn't even fall under their jurisdiction. And worse, she was using my livestock, my responsibility, as pawns in her little photo campaign. I stepped closer, boots crunching in the gravel. That's when I noticed something peculiar. On the back window of the Bentley, nearly hidden under the glossy tint, was a faded decal. It looked like a corporate fleet sticker, half peeled, like it had been scraped at but not completely removed. It hit me then. This car wasn't hers. She had no business parking it here, much less using it as a prop. The assistant snapped photos rapidly, the shutter clicks competing with the thudding hooves inside. The girl glanced at me once, eyes uncertain, but Melissa snapped her fingers and the girl went back to work. The arrogance on Melissa's face told me everything. She didn't care if my herd collapsed from heat exhaustion inside that barn. She cared about angles, symmetry, the HOA's annual report. I tried the barn door one last time, pulling hard, but it didn't move an inch. The animals inside pressed back, creating a vibration like a drum. They were panicking now, and panic in cattle spreads like fire. If they injured themselves, if one went down in the press, it could mean death. Farming wasn't just about crops and fences. It was about life raw and immediate, and she was playing with it like it was scenery. I turned back toward her, my voice harder this time. "Move the car, now." Melissa raised an eyebrow, smirking as if I were some child throwing a tantrum. "Careful, Daniel. Raising your voice won't help your situation." That was when the first neighbor wandered by, An older man walking his Labrador stopped dead when he saw the scene. His eyes darted between me, the barn, and the Bentley. The cow cries echoed over the fields, carrying further than I'd realized. Soon another jogger slowed at the property line, curiosity written all over his face. Melissa pretended not to notice, but the witnesses made her posture stiffer, her chin tilt higher. She wanted control, wanted to project authority, yet the cracks were there, small but visible. I wiped sweat from my forehead, my mind racing. Every second counted. The sun was climbing the barn, heating my herd, growing frantic. And I could already tell this wasn't going to resolve with polite words. She had picked her battleground, but she didn't realize she was standing on mine. The smell of hay mixed with the faint scent of hot chrome. My boots shifted in the dirt. I squared my shoulders, staring down the HOA queen with her luxury barricade. She thought rules and appearances gave her power. But out here on this land, the laws were written in sweat, soil, and survival. And I wasn't about to let her forget that. By the time the third neighbor appeared at the edge of my property, I realized this confrontation wasn't going to stay private. The cries of my cattle carried like a siren, pulling people in stirring curiosity and then outrage as they saw the absurdity of a gleaming white Bentley barricading a working barn. I could see the questions in their faces. How did this car get here? And why was it still there? Melissa Carter, on the other hand, thrived on the attention. She turned her body slightly toward the newcomers, her chin high like a politician at a press conference. "Good morning," she called sweetly, though her voice had the same sharpness as broken glass. "We're documenting improvements for our community standards. This barn here, it's a blemish, an eyesore. It drags down the aesthetic of our neighborhood." My fists clenched, and I heard one of the neighbors mutter under his breath, "It's a farm. That's what barns look like." The man with the Labrador gave me a look that said he understood this was wrong. But Melissa, either oblivious or willfully blind, pressed on. She gestured to the assistant, who snapped another round of photos. The girl's camera clicked and flashed, capturing angles of the Bentley gleaming in the sunlight against my weathered barn. The gauze fabric fluttered against the fence, like some parody of a wedding photo shoot, while my cattle pounded and screamed on the other side of the locked door. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Melissa," I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice so the neighbors wouldn't hear the raw edge of fury in it. "This isn't your land. This barn is functional, not decorative. My animals need out now." She met my gaze with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then perhaps you should have thought about aesthetics before choosing to live next to us." "Standards are standards, Daniel." Her words twisted in my gut. Standards. She had no idea what standards really meant. Standards were 5 a.m. Alarms, 12-hour shifts, weather dictating whether you ate well in winter or barely scraped by. Standards were ensuring your herd stayed healthy, your land fertile, and your equipment ready to work at a moment's notice. And here she was equating standards with flower pots and fabric drapery. Another violent crash shook the barn, and the neighbors winced. Even Melissa's assistant glanced nervously toward the door, her camera lowering for just a moment. But Melissa waved a dismissive hand. "Animals make noise. That's what they do. Don't get so worked up." I nearly laughed, except it came out closer to a growl. "You're not hearing noise. You're hearing distress." The Labrador barked, suddenly reacting to the sound, and its owner tugged the leash tight. "Those animals don't sound right," he muttered, but loud enough for others to hear. Another neighbor nodded, frowning at Melissa. The tide was shifting, and she knew it. Melissa's composure cracked for just a second. She pressed her lips into a thin line, adjusted her pearl necklace, and refocused on her assistant. "Get the wide shot before the light changes," she ordered. The assistant obeyed, though her hands trembled slightly as she positioned the mirror to reflect a shaft of sunlight onto the Bentley's chrome. The reflection blazed across the barn, dazzling to the eye, but obscene in context. I stepped closer again, my boots crunching over gravel, and this time I didn't bother softening my tone. "You've made your point. Now move the car, or I'll move it for you." That got her attention. Melissa turned, squaring herself against me, her expression tight with indignation. "Threats, Daniel, really. That's the kind of attitude that proves why people like me are necessary. Without order, without rules, you'd run this place into the ground." I let out a humorless laugh. "Lady, I've kept this farm alive through droughts, floods, and blizzards. You think a barn door out of alignment with your taste is going to break me?" The neighbors stirred, shifting closer. Phones came out, lenses pointed toward us, recording every second. Melissa noticed, and for the first time, her smirk faltered. But she wasn't ready to back down. Instead, she tried to pivot, speaking louder for her impromptu audience. "This barn lowers property values. Our community deserves better. We're within our rights to..." I cut her off with a sharp bark of laughter that echoed across the yard. Within your rights, you're trespassing on private land. My land. This barn is 200 feet outside your HOA boundary. Don't believe me, I've got the deed inside, signed and sealed. That earned a murmur from the crowd. Someone whispered, she doesn't have authority out here. Another voice replied, of course not, this is county farmland. Melissa's cheeks flushed, a bright red blooming under her carefully applied makeup. She opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could, another violent thud rattled the barn. This one was different, heavier, sharper. I knew the sound. The cattle weren't just panicking anymore, they were overheating. If I didn't get them out soon, I could lose one. Or more. I took a step forward, towering over her now, and spoke low so only she could hear. If one of my animals dies because of this stunt that's on you, and the law won't be on your side? Her eyes flickered just for a moment, betraying uncertainty. Then she masked it with a sneer. The law doesn't care about barns, Daniel. The law cares about order. Behind us, the assistant lowered her camera. Her face was pale. Miss Carter, she whispered, maybe we should... But Melissa silenced her with a glare so sharp it could cut steel. The Labrador barked again, ears pinned back, whining toward the barn. The neighbors shifted uneasily. More phones were raised. I could feel momentum gathering, a current I hadn't created, but one I could ride. This wasn't just my fight anymore. People were seeing her for what she really was. Still, the animals' cries grew harsher, more desperate, echoing like a war drum. My pulse matched their rhythm. I couldn't wait for her to come to her senses, because she never would. I straightened up, voice steady but loud enough for the crowd. This car moves in the next 5 minutes, or my tractor does it for you, and I promise my tractor doesn't mind a little collateral damage. The gasp that rippled through the neighbors wasn't shock at me, it was shock at her. They wanted to see what she'd do when her shiny illusion of control slammed against reality. Melissa froze, eyes darting between me, the car, and the gathering crowd. For the first time all morning, the queen of appearances looked trapped, and I knew deep down this battle was only just beginning. By the time the clock nudged past 7 in the morning, the air had grown heavy and sour, thick with tension that clung to every breath. The cries from inside the barn no longer sounded like simple agitation. They were ragged, frantic, carrying the raw edge of panic that only livestock under stress could make. My boots pressed into the dirt as I squared myself against the scene in front of me, trying to understand how something so absurd could turn so dangerous. The Bentley remained where it was, gleaming like a trophy, parked deliberately across my barn doors. Its chrome trim threw back the sunlight like shards of glass, each gleam mocking me as I stood helplessly outside. Behind it, Melissa Carter, the woman who had decided that her title as HOA's aesthetic chair gave her the right to command the land she didn't own, posed as if she were directing a photo shoot. Her assistant scrambled nervously with props. A mirror leaned at an odd angle, draped gauze fluttered in the breeze, pots of flowers positioned like stage decor. They wanted my barn, my family's barn, to serve as a backdrop for some glossy fantasy about community standards. But to me, the barn wasn't decoration. It was survival. It was where my cattle slept safely at night, where we stored feed, where my father's calloused hands had hammered the beams decades ago. Seeing it caged off by that car while the animals inside cried like trapped prisoners made the blood rush in my ears until I thought I might explode. Move the car, I said again, voice sharp this time. Melissa didn't even flinch. She smoothed the front of her blazer, adjusted her pearl necklace, and replied with a smile dripping in condescension. Daniel, this isn't about your feelings. It's about what's best for everyone. Property values matter. Appearances matter. Your barn, she gestured toward the weathered wood, is dragging the neighborhood down. The sheer audacity of her words almost made me laugh, but the pounding of hooves behind the barn door killed any trace of humor. Those aren't appearances, I snapped. That's my herd in distress. If you don't move that car, animals could die. She waved a manicured hand, dismissing me like an annoying salesman. Don't be dramatic. They'll survive until we finish our shots. Her assistant's hands trembled on the camera. She glanced toward the barn, her face pale, but didn't dare challenge Melissa directly. The girl looked trapped between obedience and conscience, and I almost pitied her. Almost. By then, neighbors had begun gathering. First, a man walking his Labrador stopped, staring in confusion. Then a jogger slowed to a halt, pulling earbuds out. Within minutes, a small crowd formed along the fence line, whispering to one another, pointing at the car, shaking their heads. Phones appeared, recording everything. This wasn't just my problem anymore, it was a spectacle. Melissa pivoted, immediately speaking louder for the audience. Good morning, everyone. Don't worry, we're conducting an important project for the betterment of our community. This barn, unsightly as it is, needs to be documented so we can argue for improvements that benefit us all." Her words rolled off her tongue like she'd rehearsed them at a board meeting, but the crowd wasn't convinced. The jogger muttered, "That's a farm, not a photo set," and several people nodded in agreement. I seized the opening. "She's lying to you," I said, raising my voice. "This barn isn't part of their HOA. It sits 200 feet outside their boundary lines. She has no authority here, none." Melissa stiffened, her lipstick smile tightening. "That's not for you to decide. Boundaries are flexible when the greater good is at stake." The arrogance in her tone nearly sent me over the edge. "Flexible," I barked. "Boundaries aren't flexible. They're written into deeds, signed in ink and enforced by law. This land is mine. This barn is mine. And that car is trespassing." The neighbors stirred again, murmurs rippling through them. One man spoke up. "If it's outside HOA, then what the hell is she doing here?" I pointed at the Bentley. "And here's another thing. See that faded decal on the back window? That's no private vehicle. That's a company fleet sticker. She's misusing a corporate car for her little stunt." Gasps and whispers spread. Phones zoomed in to capture the detail. The Labrador barked at the barn door, ears flat, reacting to the distress of the animals inside. Even the assistant hesitated, camera lowering as if she'd finally realized she was part of something rotten. Melissa's composure cracked for the first time. She turned on me with narrowed eyes. "You're making baseless accusations, Daniel. You'll regret this slander." But her voice shook, and everyone heard it. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "If even one of those cows dies because of you, Melissa, it won't be slander. It'll be criminal neglect. And you'll answer for it in front of the county." Her mask slipped then, just for a heartbeat. Fear flickered in her eyes before she pulled herself back together. She straightened her shoulders, speaking to the crowd again. "Don't be fooled. This man is trying to avoid accountability. Standards exist for a reason. Without order, without vision, communities decay." The crowd didn't buy it. A woman in running shoes crossed her arms. "My community doesn't involve starving cows for a photo shoot." A man in a ball cap added, "This is abuse. Plain and simple." I could feel momentum shifting. For once, I wasn't the only one fighting her. The tide of public opinion was turning, and she was too arrogant to see it slipping away. The barn door rattled again, and the sound that came through froze me cold. It wasn't just the frantic pounding of hooves. It was the heavy, staggering thud of animals beginning to collapse against each other. My window was closing fast. I raised my voice loud enough for every phone camera to catch. "Melissa, you have 5 minutes to move that car. If you don't, I'm getting the tractor. And I promise you, my tractor doesn't mind a little paint on its treads." The gasp that followed wasn't directed at me, it was aimed at her. Because everyone in that crowd knew I wasn't bluffing. Out here on this land, survival didn't bend to rules written in HOA handbooks. Out here, survival came in steel, sweat, and stubborn will. Melissa's smile faltered entirely now. Her eyes darted from me to the barn to the neighbors, recording every flicker of her expression. For the first time, she looked cornered. And I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about community or aesthetics or even control. This was about pride. And she would rather burn everything down than admit she was wrong. The storm clouds on the horizon rolled closer, dark and heavy. The cattle screamed once more. The neighbors pressed in. And I stood hands tight around the feed bucket, ready for the fight that was only just beginning. The sky had shifted from pale morning blue to a sickly gray, thick with the promise of rain. Farmers develop an instinct for storms. It sits in the bones, in the way the air presses against your skin, in the way birds vanish from sight and silence swallows the fields. That instinct screamed at me. Now time was bleeding away faster than I could act. My cattle were trapped behind a door barricaded by chrome arrogance. The Bentley sat like a padlock, and the cries from inside had gone hoarse, desperate. One of the younger calves let out a high, ragged bawl that nearly broke me. I'd raised those animals for 12 years. Their trust was in my hands, and Melissa Carter had reduced them to background noise for her photo op. I stormed back into the farmhouse, boots striking against wood, and found Nora at the table, her laptop glowing with maps and radar. She didn't need to look up to know what was on my face. "It's worse than we thought," she said flatly. "That front isn't holding off until tomorrow. It'll hit by late afternoon. Heavy rain, possibly hail." My throat went dry. Cutting hay was urgent enough when the forecast gave us days. With just hours, it was do or die. If I couldn't get the tractor out of the barn soon, I'd lose the crop and a week of food for the herd. My eyes landed on the yellowed deed she'd laid across the table. The parchment smelled faintly of ink and dust, but its authority was undeniable. Every line, every surveyor's mark, every signature testified that our land extended well beyond the limits of the HOA. She's outside her jurisdiction by 200 feet, Nora reminded me, tapping the boundary line. No wiggle room. This is farmland. HOA has zero claim here. She doesn't care about jurisdiction, I muttered bitterly. She cares about control. Nora's eyes sharpened, then hit her where she can't argue animal welfare law. Forget her HOA nonsense. Focus on what matters. I understood instantly. County regs, exactly. State and county statutes require livestock to have regular access to feed, water, and ventilation. By blocking that barn, she's violating every one of them. Document it. I grabbed Nora's thermal camera from the counter. She used it for energy audits, but today it would expose something far graver. Together we marched back outside. By then the crowd had doubled. Neighbors leaned along the fence line, phones raised, recording as if this were some televised trial. Their murmurs filled the air, sharp with judgment. Melissa stood stiff-backed in front of the Bentley, arms, folded, chin lifted like a queen trying to hold court. But even queens can feel when their thrones start to shake. I powered on the thermal camera and pointed it at the barn. The screen flared with violent reds and oranges, heat trapped inside, surging higher by the minute. I held it up for everyone to see. This isn't theatrics, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs. This is data. The barn is turning into an oven. My cattle are suffocating in there. The crowd gasped. A woman clapped her hand over her mouth. The Labrador barked furiously, lunging at the fence as if he could tear it down himself. Nora spoke next, her tone measured but firm. These are calibrated readings. I'm licensed to use this equipment. Anyone here can see the truth. Those animals are in distress. If this continues, it's not just trespassing. It's cruelty under state law. Gasps turned into anger. The jogger shouted, "Call animal control now," someone else echoed. "Yes, call them." Phones lit up with dialing screens. Melissa's mask cracked. She thrust her hand toward the crowd, voice rising with desperation. "Stop. You can't interfere with an HOA operation. This is official documentation for our annual report." "Annual report," scoffed a man in a ball cap. "Lady cows are dying in there." I stepped closer, holding the glowing thermal display inches from her face. "Tell me, Melissa, what looks better for your community report, pretty pictures or footage of animals collapsing because you blocked their only exit?" Her jaw clenched. Her assistant flinched, clearly torn, and finally whispered, "Miss Carter, maybe we should—" She didn't finish, because Melissa snapped quiet. That single word cut through the air like a whip crack, and it sealed her fate. The crowd shifted, muttering angrily now, eyes narrowed, their sympathy entirely gone. Nora leaned toward me, her voice low but urgent. "She's cornered. Press harder." I raised my voice loud enough to carry over the storm wind rising from the west. "Everyone here, take out your phones. Record this. If my animals die, you all saw who caused it. You all heard her admit she wouldn't move the car." The neighbors obeyed, lifting their phones' higher lenses, capturing every twitch of Melissa's face. Her posture faltered. Her carefully painted confidence wavered. Thunder cracked again, closer, rattling the ground beneath our boots. Raindrops began to speckle the Bentley's glossy hood. My cattle's cries grew ragged, one dropping into a hollow thud against the boards that made my stomach twist. I jabbed a finger toward the car. "Melissa, you have 5 minutes to move that Bentley. If you don't, I'll bring my tractor. And I promise you, my tractor doesn't care about paint or polish. It'll move that car one way or another." The crowd roared with approval, cheers, shouts of "Do it and move the car." Even the Labrador howled like he was siding with me. Melissa spun, looking for support, but there was none. Every camera was a spotlight. Every face was a mirror, showing her what she truly was, an intruder, a bully, a pretender with no authority. Her lips trembled, her hands clenched at her sides. For the first time, the queen of HOA aesthetics looked small. I stared her down the storm wind, whipping my hair, the air electric with fury and truth. "Time's almost up," I warned, and I meant it. The first crack of thunder rolled across the valley, low and distant but heavy enough to make every head turn toward the horizon. Clouds were gathering fast, darker than ink, the kind of storm front farmers learn to respect, because it doesn't ask permission before it destroys a season's work. My cattle responded with another round of panicked cries, the sound jagged and desperate. That noise cut through me more sharply than the thunder. I had lived alongside these animals for years. I knew their voices as well as I knew my wife's. And what I was hearing now wasn't frustration, it was fear. The neighbors clustered tighter along the fence. Some had folded their arms, others were openly recording, and a few were muttering to one another with growing impatience. The Labrador barked again, ears pinned back, sensing the unease of the herd inside. The jogger from earlier raised his phone higher and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. This isn't just a neighborhood spat anymore. Those animals are suffering. Melissa Carter tried to counter her voice, dripping with manufactured calm. Please, everyone, don't overreact. This is a simple matter of documentation. Community standards must be upheld for the good of all property owners. But her words were drowned out by another thud from inside the barn, followed by a deep guttural low that chilled me to the bone. One of the cows had gone down. If it stayed down for too long, it would suffocate under the weight of the others. The crowd fell silent as if they too recognized the sound of real danger. Nora stepped forward, holding up the thermal camera. Its display was a violent wash of red and orange glowing like a furnace. She spoke with the crisp authority of someone who had spent years consulting homeowners on energy safety. This isn't drama. This is data. These readings show extreme heat stress inside the barn. If those cattle aren't released immediately, they could die. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in a sun visor whispered, "That's cruelty," and her friend replied, "She could be charged for that." Melissa's face flushed a furious shade of red. Charged? With what I am documenting improvements for the community. You people are being manipulated by a farmer who refuses to adapt. The Labrador's owner snapped, "Lady, it's not your community out here. This is farmland. He's got every right." Melissa ignored him, straightening her shoulders, trying to resurrect her composure. But the cracks were showing. Her assistant had stopped photographing entirely, clutching the camera to her chest, like a shield, eyes darting nervously at the growing hostility in the crowd. I raised my voice, feeling strength in the collective mood shifting against her. "You're trespassing on land that isn't yours. You've blocked access to living creatures. And now you're being witnessed, filmed, and documented doing it. How long do you think you can bluff before someone calls animal control?" At that, the jogger shouted, "Why wait? I'm calling them now." He tapped furiously at his phone. Others followed suit. I could see screens lighting up, numbers being dialed. Melissa's head snapped toward them, panic flashing in her eyes. "Stop. You can't. This is HOA jurisdiction." But her voice cracked on the last word, and the neighbors pounced on it. A man in a ball cap yelled, "HOA has no jurisdiction here." Another chimed in, "We all know that barn's outside your line. Quit pretending." The murmurs became a tide of anger. People shook their heads, muttering words like abuse, illegal, and arrogant. Melissa spun in place, trying to find support in the faces around her, but there was none. Her assistant shrank further back, almost disappearing behind the Bentley, and then came the moment that tipped the balance completely. A county surveyor, someone I recognized by face, but not by name, pushed through the fence line, clipboard in hand. He had apparently been called by one of the neighbors who worked in local government. He held up official papers and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This barn sits well outside HOA boundaries. I've reviewed the county maps myself. Melissa Carter has no legal authority on this property." The crowd erupted. Phones zoomed in, capturing the documents. Someone shouted, "There it is, proof." Others muttered curses under their breath. Melissa froze lips, parted eyes wide. Her power crumbled in real time, the foundation of her smug confidence dissolving under the weight of cold, hard evidence. I stepped forward until I was standing just a few feet from her. My voice was low, steady, and meant only for her ears, but the crowd could feel the energy in it. "You hear that? You've got no authority here. And when animal control arrives, they'll see everything on record, your car, your photos, your negligence. You'll be the one explaining this to the law, not me." Her hands trembled. She glanced around wildly, searching for an escape, but the neighbors boxed her in with their phones and glares. The assistant whispered urgently, "Miss Carter, maybe we should just move the car," but Melissa hissed, quiet again, though her voice wavered. Another thunderclap split the sky closer, now rattling windows, and sending a chill through the crowd. The storm was nearly here. I turned toward the barn, listening to the fading strength in the cries of my cattle. My jaw set like stone. I lifted my voice so the entire neighborhood could hear. "Melissa Carter has 5 minutes to move this car. If she doesn't, I'll fetch my tractor. And I promise you my tractor won't hesitate." The crowd gasped, murmurs surging again, but this time the shock wasn't at my threat. It was at the inevitability of it. Everyone knew I meant every word. Melissa's painted smile vanished. Her eyes darted between me, the car, and the dozens of cameras catching every flicker of her face. For the first time, the queen of appearances looked cornered, stripped of her power. And I knew then this battle had escalated beyond a dispute. It had become a reckoning. The cattle moaned again, thunder boomed above, and the first drops of rain tapped against the Bentley's hood. The storm was coming for all of us. The storm had fully gathered by the time the first county truck appeared at the end of my drive. Its flashing amber lights cut through the gloom, reflecting off the Bentley's slick hood. The murmurs among the neighbors turned into a low roar, half relief, half anticipation. They knew what this meant. This wasn't just a farmer's word against an HOA chair anymore. This was law stepping in. 2 inspectors climbed out, clipboards in hand, one of them wearing the official vest of Animal Services. The taller of the 2, a man with gray hair pulled into a tight ponytail, spoke first. "Who's the property owner here?" I raised my hand. "I am. Daniel Morgan." My voice cracked slightly, not from fear, but from the pressure of the moment. He nodded curtly, then scanned the crowd before his eyes landed on the Bentley. His brow furrowed, the kind of look only years of experience can carve. "That's your vehicle, Melissa," to my disbelief stepped forward. "Yes, it's mine. And we're conducting authorized HOA documentation." Her words were sugar-coated, but her voice trembled just enough for the inspectors to catch it. The second inspector, a woman with a badge clipped to her belt, didn't even look up from her clipboard. "Ma'am, do you have written authorization from the county to block a livestock enclosure?" Melissa faltered. "This is private community enforcement." The inspector cut her off. "That's a no. Let's be clear, state and county statutes override neighborhood rules. This barn is outside HOA jurisdiction, which means your vehicle is obstructing agricultural operations." A cheer rose from the neighbors. Phones zoomed in, recording every word. Melissa's cheeks flushed crimson, her painted confidence slipping like wet plaster. The woman inspector turned to me. "Sir, do you have evidence of animal distress?" Without a word, I handed her Nora's thermal camera. The screen glowed a dangerous red, pulsing with heat signatures. Nora added, "We've been recording for over an hour. Continuous data showing heat stress inside the barn." The inspector's eyes darkened. She motioned to the crowd. "Everyone stand back." Then she strode straight to the barn door, pressing her ear against the wood. The sound inside was unmistakable: hoarse bawls, frantic shuffling, the hollow thud of bodies pressed too tightly together. She recoiled, her expression grim. "Immediate violation. Animals in distress." Melissa's voice shot up an octave. "You can't take his word for it. He's manipulating you, trying to." The gray-haired inspector silenced her with a single raised hand. "Ma'am, obstruction of livestock access is a direct breach of agricultural welfare statutes. I don't care if you're president of the HOA, the county, or the United States itself, those animals come first." The crowd erupted again, applause mixing with shouts of vindication. The Labrador barked wildly, tail whipping like a flag in the storm. Melissa tried one last defense. "This is about property values, about order. If we don't enforce standards, chaos takes over." I stepped forward, my voice low but clear. "Chaos isn't cows crying for food. Chaos is you thinking your HOA badge makes you bigger than the law." The inspector gestured to one of the county trucks. "Document everything. Vehicle placement, crowd, witnesses, animal noises. Get me full photo evidence." His assistant hurried off with a camera circling the Bentley, snapping pictures of every angle. The woman inspector pulled a tape measure from her belt, striding across the property to the survey stakes. With practiced precision, she charted the boundary lines. When she returned, her tone was matter-of-fact final. "This barn sits 200 feet outside HOA jurisdiction. That car is trespassing on private agricultural property. Period." The weight of her words landed like a hammer. Melissa sagged slightly, her shoulders dipping as though the fight had been knocked out of her. But then she tried again, clutching at straws. "This is harassment. He's targeting me because I... But she couldn't finish the sentence. The inspectors weren't listening anymore. They were documenting, measuring, recording audio of the cattle inside. Every cry from the barn was another nail in her coffin. The woman inspector turned to me. "Mr. Morgan, we're issuing an official violation notice. Blocking livestock access carries fines, and if conditions had continued, potential criminal charges. Do you want the vehicle removed immediately?" I stared at the Bentley, gleaming defiantly against the storm-dark sky, then back at Melissa's pale face. "Yes," I said. My voice shook not with fear, but with satisfaction. "Remove it." The inspector nodded. "Tow companies en route. Until then, this vehicle cannot be moved by its current operator. It's evidence." Melissa gasped. "Evidence? You can't." The inspector snapped back. "Ma'am, be quiet. You've said enough." The neighbors roared, their approval voices rising with the storm. Phones captured every second, every flinch of Melissa's face as her authority unraveled in front of dozens of witnesses and 2 government officials. Nora slipped her hand into mine, her grip steady and warm despite the rain beginning to patter harder against our shoulders. "We've got her," she whispered. "She's done." I believed her. because for the first time all morning, I wasn't the one shouting into the void. The law was here. The evidence was clear. And Melissa Carter's reign of intimidation was collapsing under the weight of her own arrogance. Another thunderclap boomed overhead. The cattle cried out once more. The storm pressed down fierce and unforgiving, but this time I wasn't alone in the fight. By the time the tow truck rumbled into sight, the storm had begun to spit heavy drops, fat and cold against the scorched earth. Each one splattered against the Bentley's hood like a warning from the sky itself. The crowd of neighbors had swollen into something resembling a protest line, their umbrellas popping open, phones still raised, unwilling to miss what they knew was coming. Melissa Carter stood rigid by the Bentley jaw, clenched arms wrapped tightly around her chest. The same woman who had strutted in with pearls and power now looked cornered, her mascara already streaking as rain began to run. Her assistant huddled beside her, soaked camera cradled against her chest, eyes darting anywhere but at me. The tow truck driver hopped down from the cab, a burly man with grease-stained hands and a reflective vest. He barely glanced at Melissa before asking the inspector, "This, the vehicle in violation?" The gray-haired inspector nodded. "Yes. Document it, then hook it up. It's being impounded as evidence." Melissa's voice cracked like a snapped twig. "You can't. That's private property. You have no right." The woman inspector held up her clipboard sheets of official forms already half filled. "Ma'am, this vehicle has been identified as part of a corporate fleet. Our preliminary checks show it's registered to Helios Media Group, not to you personally. That means you've been misusing corporate assets without authorization on private farmland." The neighbors gasped the words, cutting through the rain like lightning. Phones zoomed in, capturing Melissa's face as the truth detonated around her. The jogger whistled low. "So she's been lying this whole time." Melissa spun her voice shrill. "It's a loaner, a community partnership vehicle. I had authorization." The inspector's eyes narrowed, then produced the paperwork. "Now." Melissa fumbled with a folder she yanked from her assistant's bag, pulling out a crumpled sheet of paper. She thrust it toward the inspector with trembling hands. "Here, proof." The inspector studied it for less than 10 seconds before her lips curled into a frown. She held it up to the crowd. The rain had already begun to bleed the ink, but even smudged, it was obvious mismatched fonts, no official seal, and a signature that looked more like a child's scrawl than any county clerk's. "This," the inspector said, her voice flat, "is a forgery." The crowd erupted. Shouts of fraud and unbelievable rang out. The Labrador barked furiously, straining against its leash, as if it wanted to chase her from the property itself. Melissa's assistant staggered back, horror plain on her face. "Miss Carter, you said," she started, but Melissa snapped. "Shut up." The girl's eyes welled with tears. She dropped the folder, and the rain plastered the fake document to the mud where it disintegrated into pulp. The tow truck driver, unconcerned by the drama, knelt by the Bentley and began setting chains. The metallic clink echoed like a gavel striking wood. Melissa lunged forward, shrieking, "Don't you dare touch that car, I forbid you." The driver didn't even look up. "Lady, you've got no authority here. Orders are orders." The inspector added, "Ma'am, if you interfere with evidence recovery, you'll be charged with obstruction. I suggest you step back." Melissa froze, trembling, her painted world crumbling in the mud and storm. I stepped closer, rain running down my face, my boots sinking into softening earth. "You see what happened here, Melissa. You thought appearances gave you power. But the law doesn't bend to pearls and forged papers. Not here. Not ever." Her eyes burned with something between hatred and desperation. "You'll regret this, Daniel. You think you've won, but I have connections." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Connections? Look around you. The only connection you've got now is a tow cable dragging your lies off my land." The crowd cheered, their voices louder than the storm. Phones caught every angle, the Bentley being pulled up onto the tow bed, its wheels spinning helplessly as if fighting against the chains. It was the perfect symbol, arrogance, undone by its own weight. The gray-haired inspector approached me. "Mr. Morgan, will file charges. Trespass. Obstruction of livestock access. Potential fraud investigation depending on what our legal team finds with that document. Do you want to submit your thermal recordings as evidence?" I handed him the device without hesitation. "Every second's on there." "Use it all." He nodded. "Good. That'll hold in court." Melissa wailed as the Bentley was secured. Her assistant, pale and drenched, whispered an apology in my direction before slinking off into the rain. The tow truck roared back to life, hauling the Bentley away. Its taillights faded into the storm, leaving deep ruts in the mud, as if marking the path arrogance had taken out of my life. For a long moment, all that remained was the sound of rain, the thunder, and the steady, relieved lowing of cattle, finally sensing the tension outside breaking. My herd was alive, my land was safe, and Melissa Carter, she was finished. But even as she stood there, trembling, mascara-streaked and pearls hanging crooked, I knew this wasn't the end. People like her didn't learn humility, they doubled down. And something told me she'd find a new way to claw back her illusion of control. Still, in that moment, with the storm raging and the neighbors cheering, I felt a kind of justice I hadn't known in years. The ground had pushed back harder. The next morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the fields soaked and heavy with the smell of wet earth. My boots squelched against the mud as I walked out to the barn. The air was sharp and clean, a strange contrast to the wreckage left behind gouged ruts from the tow truck scraps of soggy gauze, a broken pot from Melissa's photo shoot tipped on its side. The cattle pressed against the fence calm, now their cries replaced by soft lowing as they grazed on the fresh grass. Relief washed through me. They had survived, even thrived after the ordeal. But Melissa Carter had not. Word traveled fast in small towns. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, I had already heard from 3 different neighbors that Melissa had been removed from her HOA post. Her forged documents had triggered not just county inquiries but corporate ones too. Helios Media Group, the company that owned the Bentley, had launched a full-scale internal investigation. Their lawyers apparently didn't find community beautification a convincing excuse for unauthorized vehicle use. Still, the drama wasn't over. Around noon, a white van pulled up at the end of my driveway. 2 men in suits stepped out, their briefcases gleaming under the Sunday. They weren't law enforcement, they were corporate. Insurance adjusters, by the look of their crisp collars and carefully neutral expressions. They introduced themselves quickly, flashing IDs. I didn't bother memorizing and got straight to business. Mr. Morgan, one of them said, "We're here on behalf of Helios Media Group's Risk Management Department. We've received reports of unauthorized use of company assets on your property. We'll need a full statement." I handed them copies of the thermal recordings. Nora had already uploaded the survey maps and the violation notices from Animal Services. Their pens scratched furiously against their notepads. The taller one asked, "Did Miss Carter ever present any official authorization documents before this incident?" I nearly laughed. "Only a forgery. Your investigators probably have the remains of it already." The rain destroyed most of it, but the inspectors photographed it. They exchanged glances grim. The shorter one said, "That confirms what we feared. This isn't just unauthorized use, it's attempted fraud tied to our fleet assets. The liability exposure is significant." Melissa's arrogance had escalated things from nuisance to disaster. What started as trespass was now corporate fraud, insurance violations, and potentially criminal charges. And she dragged the whole HOA into the mud with her. Later that evening, neighbors gathered in my yard bringing casseroles and beer as if this were some kind of community celebration. They slapped my back, shook my hand, told me I'd done the right thing standing up to her. One older man leaned in, voice low. "We've been waiting years for someone to put her in her place. You didn't just protect your farm, Daniel. You reminded all of us that these people don't own us." His words landed heavy. Because that was the truth. Melissa's downfall wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had been bullied, fined, or harassed under the guise of community standards. But the story didn't end with cheering neighbors. The following week, I received a notice from the county clerk. Melissa Carter was officially facing charges: trespass, animal welfare violations, and pending investigation into document fraud. The HOA board had voted her out, unanimously desperate to salvage their reputation. Helios Media Group filed suit to recover damages, citing breach of trust and unauthorized asset deployment. And then came the auction. When Helios seized the Bentley, they declared it compromised, unsuitable to return to corporate service. It went to auction as evidence cleared salvage. I stood in the crowd that day, surrounded by collectors and scrap dealers, my hands sweating against the paddle. Part of me wondered if I should even bother. But when the bidding rose and then faltered, I raised my paddle one last time, and just like that, the Bentley was mine. Not as a prize, not as some status symbol, but as justice. The next morning, with half the neighborhood watching from the fence line, I drove my tractor out slow and steady, its treads leaving heavy prints in the mud. The Bentley sat in the same spot it had once blocked, though now it belonged to me legally, a husk waiting for its fate. I lowered the bucket, pressed forward, and felt the steel bite into chrome. The crunch echoed across the field, sharp and final. The neighbors cheered, some even clapping. Melissa wasn't there to see it, but she didn't need to be. She would hear about it soon enough. When the car flattened under the weight of the tractor, it wasn't just metal collapsing. It was the end of a reign of intimidation, the crushing of arrogance under the wheels of real work. I'd taken back not only my barn, not only my land, but the dignity she had tried to strip from me. I posted a new sign on the fence the next day: private agricultural property. HOA authority ends here. No one questioned it. No one dared. Melissa Carter's downfall was complete, and my farm, battered but unbroken, stood stronger than ever. There's a lesson in all of this, one I hope anyone listening can take to heart. Power built on arrogance and fraud crumbles fast when it collides with truth, law, and community. Melissa thought she could bend reality to fit her vision of standards. But real standards aren't cosmetic. They're about integrity, about respect for boundaries, about caring for what's in your trust. Neighbors, property owners, anyone who's ever felt crushed under someone else's petty authority, remember this: your rights matter, your voice matters. And when you stand your ground, even against the loudest bully in the room, the truth has a way of shining through. If this story struck you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Share your own battles, your own victories. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are more HOA tales, more stories of justice and grit waiting to be told.